Hi class, this is Mr. Eckert, and this is the format with which you're going to get information on targets. You'll go through these with your guided note sheet and fill them in as you go. If you have any questions as you're taking notes and filling out your guided note sheet, feel free to ask in class or at the end or beginning of any class. But this Intro to Biology unit, you can see, has 4 objectives. And in this video, we're going to go through objective 1, which says that you should be able to name and describe at least 5 different characteristics or themes of life that apply to all living organisms. So first, if you just think about all different kinds of living things, from trees to bacteria to fish, maybe if you have a pet dog, there's got to be things that they have in common. So some of these, this is not an inclusive list by any means, but these are some of the more common characteristics that you will see in all living things. And one of them is that all living things are composed of 6 main elements that you'll find on the periodic table of the elements. And actually, those 6 elements make up 99% of all living things. And those elements are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So one of the things that helps me remember things is just if I can use an acronym. And the nonsense word CHNOPS, or if you want to remember CHOMPS, just alternate the O and the N. That'll help you to remember these 6 elements. But they make up 99% of all living things. It doesn't matter whether you take a dandelion plant and chop it up into little bits and pieces and analyze it for all their elements, or a worm, or any living thing. If you did the same thing, chopped it all up, analyzed it for the elements, you'd come up with 99% of that living thing is made up of just these 6 elements. All living things are made up of cells, and they're either made up of one cell, like bacteria, they're unicellular organisms, or of course all the things that we see around us that we recognize as being alive are multicellular. They're made up of more than one cell. All living things use energy and have to have a way to replace lost energy. So there's basically 2 main ways that they do that. Either they're autotrophs and can photosynthesize, like the plants that you see in this photograph here. Or, that includes algae. All algae can photosynthesize, and there are some bacteria that can photosynthesize as well. Or they have to eat things to replace lost energy, and the term that applies to that is being a heterotroph. All living things need water. Water is essential for life. If you think about why, one of the main reasons why is if you look inside of a cell, almost all the little chemical reactions that are happening inside a cell and inside living things require water. Either those reactions are happening in water, or water is a component of the reaction itself. And most living things then are made up of mostly water. Depending on what source you look at, you'll get different numbers on this, but you and I are about 66% water. And if you think about something like a watermelon or a jellyfish, of course it's much higher than that. It's in the high 90 percentages of made up of water. All living things will respond to different stimuli. So stimuli, if you think of, you should be able to come up with hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. But a living thing, when given a stimulus, will respond to it. So here's one example with a spider. The stimulus might be a vibration that it feels on its web. It'll rush out in response to that vibration and see what might be captured in the web. Another one that you can see in plants, if you start a seed growing, and the leaves and the green part will grow upwards in response to light. So light in this case would be the stimulus, and the leaves are turning towards that. In fact, I'm sure you've noticed if you put a plant in maybe your windowsill in the kitchen, the green part will actually turn towards the outside, the window. And if you turn it around so that the green parts are facing inside the house, over a matter of 2 or 3 days, it'll turn back towards the window. So that's called phototropism, the stimulus being light. The roots will grow downward in response to gravity. So the gravity there is the stimulus, and that's called geotropism. Here's another example. You may have seen this bird around Gehenna. It's called a killdeer, and they actually nest a little differently from other birds. The female will make a nest out of stones on the ground, and if somebody gets close to it, whether it be a human being or a dog, the female will have a very unusual response to that stimulus. And that is, she will pretend that she has a broken wing. She'll actually drag her wing, one wing on the ground, and run away from the nest in hopes, of course, that you or the dog or whatever it is will follow her thinking, oh, this is going to be an easy meal. And then when she gets about 100 yards away from the nest or so and knows that her babies are safe, she'll fly up to a tree and wait it out until the intruder leaves, and then she'll return to her nest. All living things grow and develop. And here's, one example. A butterfly, or a moth in this case, lays eggs. They hatch into a caterpillar, a larva, which turns into a pupa and then an adult. So you can call that a life cycle. And living things grow and develop by cells getting bigger, cell enlargement, and or cells dividing. And of course, a multicellular organism is adding cells all the time. You have more cells in your body now than you did when you were in 5th grade. Excuse me. Here's a picture you can see over a span of probably a couple of weeks of some baby rabbits, and you can see how much they've grown over time. All living things reproduce, and that should be a common sense characteristic to you, because if they did not reproduce, then of course the species would eventually go extinct. So notice we're saying the species as a whole reproduces. Of course, not all individuals within a species will reproduce. Some are not able to for whatever reason. It might be a physical reason that they're not able to reproduce, or some don't get the opportunity to. If you think of white-tailed deer, for example, only the dominant males that battle for that right to mate with the females have that opportunity. Here's a turtle you may have seen some of the local creeks and streams or rivers around Gehenna, and that is a snapping turtle laying her eggs in the mud, and she'll cover those up, and the warmth of the ground actually is what incubates them. You've probably seen these multiple times around Gehenna. On the top is a mallard hen with her ducklings. On the bottom is a Canada goose with her goslings. One of them mates for life, and that would be the Canada goose. And when we say mates for life, they choose a mate and stay with that one mate. Now, if that mate happens to die, they, of course, will pick another mate. But they don't mate with multiple individuals like the mallard duck will. All living things have adaptations. And so we're using adaptations as a noun here. They have either physical traits, like you can see in this butterfly. It's got a tube-like mouth that it uses to obtain its food. Or it might have a behavior that gives them an advantage. So the key word there is in bold. An adaptation is a trait that gives them an advantage in their environment. So a behavior might be like you think of reptiles, how they'll bask in the sun to raise their metabolism up higher. That would be an adaptation. Here's another common animal we have in Ohio. Many students and adults might mistake this for a beaver. It is an aquatic animal. It's a muskrat. And so if you just think about it being aquatic, you can probably guess what some of its adaptations are. And of course, it has webbed feet. It has a thick layer of fur. In fact, it has two different layers of fur, one being waterproof. And its tail, unlike a beaver, which is flattened horizontally, its tail is flattened vertically to help move it through the water. All living things evolve, and we're going to define evolution as being simply how living things change over time. And we're talking about populations or species of living things changing over time. Here's a photograph you can see of a German cockroach, and it's actually on a fossil of a fossilized cockroach that used to live in Ohio. Good thing they still don't anymore, because it looks like that is probably 4 to 6 inches long. So if you look at this photograph, the goslings in this picture are certainly going to go through changes over time. Would you say that that is an example of evolution? And you'd be correct if you say no. That would be an example of growth and development. Remember, individual organisms do not and cannot evolve because evolution involves the passing on of genes to other future generations. So they're going through growth and development. A population of Canada geese as a whole might evolve, but these individual goslings are not evolving. And here's an organism that used to live in Ohio. It didn't change over time, so it went extinct. And many of you recognize this as a trilobite. And they lived in shallow seas, which Ohio used to be covered by shallow seas, and they're now completely extinct. So those are some of the characteristics that you should know. Again, the target says that you not only should be able to name those, but describe them. So make sure that you're not just writing down a list of those. You have to know at least 5, but you should be able to write a description for each as well. And certainly being able to write an example for something is a great way to show that you understand it at a deeper level. If you have any questions, again, make sure that you ask in class.